Okay, this lecture is a short lecture on basically the civil rights movement. A lot of it reflects what's going on in the in your phone or textbook. So I'm going to just briefly talk about it. The main thing I want you to do is really pay attention to a lot of videos that I have connected to this presentation. So just go on the actual Prezi presentation and check out some of the videos, the famous speeches from people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, or James Baldwin. And I really encourage you to check out this video here. It actually has James Baldwin among a number of famous actors as they're reflecting on the Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. So I think it's really cool, like historical resource. Um, yeah, same thing. Like I have a lot of music as well connected to this, since civil rights movement was such a cultural phenomenon. Um, the civil rights movement really gets going with a number of things. First of all, the civil rights movement has longevity. It goes back decades before Dr. King got involved. But things like the pushing to end school segregation, with a famous case of Brown versus Board's education, is sometimes seen as like the start. So if you remember with during the Eisenhower presidency, you can already see things moving ahead to start dealing with civil rights. Then the murder of Emmett Till was a big shock to people. And just months after Emmett Till's murder, you have Rosa Parks' moment on the bus. So if you look at the dates there, you can kind of see how things are moving along. Same thing with the school segregation in Little Rock, Arkansas, where they had to send the National Guard to protect African American students. Um, with this history, and I bring it here, and it's kind of it bounces off the timeline, but you had the bombing of the four children at the church in Alabama happened actually weeks after the Dream speech. I included here just to like illustrate that there is no like long line of things just progressively getting better as the activism grows. In fact, you get a lot of violent pushback against the innocent. All right, so again, definitely check out the video of King's speech. It's probably the most famous speech in American history, up there with Gettysburg Address. But King, as a Baptist minister, was um, got involved in Alabama and had a lot of success there. He founds the SCLC, and with the nonviolent resistance that he led in Montgomery, Alabama, um, he gets a lot of like public recognition. And as things getting pushed ahead as the 60s roll along, he gives probably again the most famous address um, in American history. Um, this push for to end segregation leads into a creation of other groups. You have a bunch of basically a multiracial campaign of these freedom rides, these buses of people going down into the South and trying to like push for the end of segregation. This all enacts some legislation, specifically Civil Rights Act of 1964, on the eve of the just following up JFK's assassination. Um, Another group that's created is SNCC or SNCC. This will eventually become a nationalist movement under Stokely Carmichael. He gives a famous Black Power speech. Um, as at post Dream speech, King gets involved in the Selma March, famous movie, recent movie on that. This leads to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Again, important legislation. Following up all this, in the summer of 1965, you have the Watts riots, which shows that racial tension is not just in the American South, but that it's also in urban areas. And this kind of leads to the end of King's life, where he begins to get a lot more involved in labor movements, speaking out against the Vietnam War, and his plan before his death was to lead what was called the Poor People's Campaign, the multiracial movement to basically create this coalition of forces. Poor People's Campaign, just side note, is a kind of a fascinating historical phenomenon. Um, they'll still do it. King is dead by then. Senator Chavez does not join because he's doing this fast. But you get like Chicano groups, African American groups, even poor white American groups, Native American groups included in this movement. It didn't go so well, and a lot of people think it's because of King's absence. Definitely check his last address here. Is his last speech in this video. Okay. So the other figure I'm kind connected to the civil rights movement is who I would call the most famous American Muslim in history, and that is Malcolm X. I know Netflix has a new series on his death that might be of interest. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say if it's great or not, but heard it's getting some buzz. But Malcolm X was a small time hustler. He was sent to prison for that, and it was through there he discovered Nation of Islam. Again, another side note, in the Baldwin book you're reading, Baldwin does go on and talk about Nation of Islam there, so that might help a little bit in the background of this black nationalist movement. He is the opposite of King, where King is preaching, through the act of peaceful resistance. Malcolm is basically talking about armed self-defense, and in fact is pretty harsh towards King's movement. Eventually, because of what he sees as some ethical problems with Elijah Muhammad personally, he begins to break away from Nation of Islam. And the other thing with that is Malcolm was becoming more and more vocal in his activism, and Muhammad felt threatened by that. Eventually, Malcolm X will go on the Hajj, this trip to Mecca that you can see in the clip I have there from the Malcolm X film. And there you start to see him toning down the language of black nationalism, and he becomes a lot more open to working with other races. Eventually, he is murdered, and he really gets in a lot of ways more famous after his death because of his famous autobiography. So that leads to the radicalization of the black community, especially the young people after 68. Now some of these groups were slowly getting going prior to the death of Malcolm and Martin, but I think with the Vietnam War and with their assassinations, this group of figures, kind of like the Black Panthers and other movements, tended to be a lot more militant. They really picked up on the language of self-defense, and so you see that with the black pictures of the Black Panthers throughout this on this slide. They were not separatist. If you think of the Black Panthers, for example, I mean, the language of Black Power and Black is Beautiful were affirming terms, in light of American racism for hundreds of years. And so even their style became very popular. And with the berets and the sunglasses and the leather jackets and stuff like that. But the main thing behind the Black Panthers was one, preaching self defense, but number two, also monitoring police action towards the Black community. This obviously gets them in a lot of trouble and into like confrontations, which then leads into a lot of time in court for many of their leaders like Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and Eldridge Cleaver. So that's where like the Free Huey campaign and the Free Angela Davis campaign popped up, because they were both connected to this. And it did get popular support from celebrities and others trying to protect or to see them not go to jail. Um, there's one of the thief figures, Fred Hampton, was the leader of, was also Black Panther in Chicago. He's the founder of the Rainbow Coalition, and he was murdered in Chicago. So it's a kind of a famous death there. But these are all famous figures from this. A lot of their analysis is not just on race, but particularly on class and seeing what's going on in Vietnam as an extension of American imperialism that has already been basically part of the reality of the Black community within the urban setting. So that's how they saw it. Okay, then there's James Baldwin, who you're reading. Baldwin comes from a long line of great Black writers like Richard Wright in his book Native Son, or even Ralph Ellison in his book Invisible Man. So Baldwin is most famous for being a novelist, but he also wrote a number of essays, and The Fire the Next Time. Fire Next Time is considered his greatest achievement in essay writing. So I'm having you write your paper on him because he really gets this idea of race consciousness, of understanding the racial dynamic historically speaking in the United States, and how it carries over into our day and age. He was actually born in Harlem. Had a really tough life with his father's family. Father was a kind of a tortured man. Became like a teenage preacher, and then abandoned that, and then left for Europe to become a writer, and was kind of done in America. Then came back because of the civil rights movement and got involved with that. He was also a gay Black man, so he does. I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of tension for him, and problem about acceptance in a lot of ways. And we got to think this is the 1950s and 60s, 70s, 80s still, so it's a different time period, and so he touches on some of that as well in his writings. Um, Definitely check out this video here of his speech in I believe it's Oxford. It's a debate with William F. Buckley, but I think this is one of his most poignant messages here. And it's just kind of a fantastic look at just his speaking style. Finally, things within the celebrity world or entertainment world, there's a lot of shift that happens within music, literature, film, and a lot of it I just listed out here. And it shows how much African American culture has just really been at the foundation of American culture. So check out some of the videos I posted, and it kind of shows the creativity of the Black community.